us or without us? With us. With board members.
Do you want the board or just the students?
She said with us.
With
With
the
board
students?
members. Yeah, that's what she said.
Yeah, you're not a very good listener.
Let's get your picture before you leave. Come with the team. That would be great.
Oh, yeah, wait.
Thank you very much.
It's after public participation.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it got real cold. So next up is our superintendent's report.
So we have a couple things to go over tonight. The first one would be to have what's called our public hearing on the 2025-2026 school calendar. And so at the board meeting, typically before it's voted on, you present the calendar and I have our results per our contract. And I'll give you information that's also in front of you at your tables. And then in 30 days, after the hearing period is over, then the board can bring it to the next meeting and take action. If you look at our December meeting, it is not 30 days from this meeting, so our actual vote on the calendar will be January 15th. But if there are any questions, concerns, ideas, those could come directly to me or to Lori. And we'll take all those into consideration and make refinements as we can prior to that January 15th vote. Typically, there's not a lot of change, especially when you hear the results from what the process was and the voting. So in our current contract, we now do two calendars, one that's created by the district and one that's created by our teacher union, CFEA. And we put those out to a staff vote. So the calendar that's in front of you, calendar 2, 82.7% of the staff preferred this calendar. That's 237 staff members that participated. If we look at just the CFEA vote, it was 93% that voted for this calendar, which is pretty high for what we'd seen in past years. And it's very similar to the current calendar that we have. So I'm going to just read you some data and I'll try to explain along the way. But the 2025-2026 school year for grades 1 through 12 will run Wednesday, August 20th through Wednesday, June 3rd. We also tried to get some other dates on this calendar while we were voting and getting it in front of families. So preschool would start on Tuesday, August 26th. Kindergarten would start on Monday, August 25th. And as soon as we get the final dates from the AP board and OHSSA, we'll be able to give you the graduation date. So it's not on the version you have tonight. Winter break would be from Monday, December 22nd through Friday, January 2nd. And students, actually, the teachers would then have a PD day on Monday, January 5th, which means that students would,
Wait, what? Or the 19th of December?
no, the calendar that's printed for you is not the updated
Yeah.
version. So January 5th would be the PD day with students returning on January 6th. So winter break, just to clarify, would be Monday, December 22nd, and the students would return on Tuesday, January 6th.
Yeah, the calendar that's
updated
attached
online.
is to
Right.
the agenda is correct. So if you want to look at the calendar at home,
that
it's
the only
it's the
That's the
calendar on
only
agenda.
difference.
Okay.
So, spring break would be Monday, March 23rd through Friday, March 27th. And students would return on Monday, March 3rd. Remember that our spring break is set by a consortium of schools. That would be the Excel Tech program, so that we are consistent across the board, so that we didn't have our students attending different days. So
Which
like,
is why we have that sort of odd-looking
it's-
4-day gap.
Yeah, it's kind of a different, because see some breaks in there following spring break. So the other part that we want to report is just instructional hours, because I think that's important to know when you look at the calendar. The Gurney Student Day is from 8:35 to 3:20. That's a 6.25 hours that count as instruction. The intermediate school is 8:25 to 3:20. That's a 6.5 hour day for students. And then high school and middle school student day would be 7:40 to 2:50, which is a 6.75 hour day. And in the sheet you have, it gives you the details of how that converts, those hours convert into days. Remember that school years are counted on hours now. But we still give you the days because ironically, our contracts are still in days. So I want you to be able to see the days and the hours. And I'll make sure that you get the updated version. That January 5th day was added because the administrative team collectively does the professional development. And since our new semester would begin when students return, and that's 7/12, a lot of teachers that have those semester classes will have a whole new roster of students, and there's transition and learning students and our desire to do personalized learning and those kinds of things. So one of our focuses is how are we using our time and how are we best prepared to serve? And so by adding that day, it was unanimous through the administrative team that we needed a professional day before we started a new semester so that people could prepare, as well as K-6 coming back and just being ready to start the second half of the year. They're on trimester, so it's a little different. But the records day is that December 19th. So everything for the 7/12, as far as the 9-week semester, would end prior to break, which is something that we've talked about a lot in the past, to make sure that a break was a break for students and they didn't have to worry about coming back to exams.
So just to clarify, the 7 through 12 are out as of the 19th,
Correct.
and then the K through 6 are out as of the 22nd.
Correct. Or their last day would be the 19th, K-6.
Correct.
Or probably preschool 6.
And then you said something to me today earlier that I thought people might be interested in, which is that we're going to try to move to doing the calendars 2 years, getting 2 years of calendars done at once, as
So-
opposed to 1 year. Because I start getting questions from parents in September usually about what when the breaks will be. I just want to acknowledge there is some real complexity in doing these calendars because we've got K through 6 on a different schedule than 7 through 12. We've got the consortium of Excel Tech schools who are on a different calendar that we're trying to align with, where everyone's trying to get their spring break and days the same. Then we have teachers who live in different districts. About 50% of our teachers live in the district, but we have teachers and staff who live in other districts. So we try to make sure that we're aligning with their days so that their kids who they have in school districts are also able to, be out when their parents are out. So a lot goes into it, but if we could do 2 years at once, that'd be great.
And we're finishing our instructional time audit right now, specifically for 12. And that will help us better decide how we want to structure the calendar as well, and to make sure that we're utilizing every day as we need. The only other difference I might draw out, if you are a calendar watcher in some respects, you'll notice that there are very few PD days in the fall. And so why this 30-day window and why the public hearing part is so important is because we get that feedback, and then we can also use it to redesign future as well. And so one of the concerns was the number of 4-day weeks that we had on this calendar, especially in the fall. The other concern is that if you teach a semester class, your first semester had significantly less days than the second semester class did.
Right.
And so by putting the PD later in the year, we were able to better balance what that semester class would look like. So the feedback's super important. If you do get contacted or anyone would like to give us feedback, we would love to hear it. And if we need to make adjustments, then I would present that on the 15th prior to voting on it. But you're not voting on this tonight.
I know that this is probably not on the radar just yet, but on January 2nd and 3rd of this year, our community ed is offering some programs for our students to be able to like come back to school a little bit, engage, right? Like that's a really long time to be separated from your friends, especially for our Gurney students. So having that opportunity, I think, is really great. Is there a consideration, since the students wouldn't be returning back till Tuesday the 6th, to have something additional throughout that week of the 29th through the 2nd?
I think that's great. And any kind of feedback like that would be really important,
Awesome.
because then our student advancement teams, our student wellness teams can go back and design and work.
Jennifer, I had a quick question. Do you know offhand what the hour requirement is at the state? Or anyone, does anybody know that requirement?
I do, because I have that same question. Or you can answer it, obviously. I looked, 7 through 12 require 1,001 hours, and K through 6 require 910.
Yeah, so I think it's worth mentioning for anybody that's watching from home that we're not at the bare minimum here. We're actually have built in a significant amount more time, which is
Yeah,
obviously to our advantage.
don't think of those as extra calamity days though, because we don't want to use them as calamity, but if we had to, there would be a significant amount of days before we would have to make them up. So that's why we're just really working on what does our calendar look like? What does our instructional time look like? How do we better collaborate and help staff design those engaging lessons and do those things? What does all of that look like? And so there's a lot of work put into the calendar. The student advancement team, in collaboration with Jen Banko's People Services, are primarily the two that design for the district. That's how it's designed.
Great. Any other questions?
Yes, you have questions about the presentation? And then it's also just under public participation listed, because should anyone want to comment or talk about it, just to make sure that they knew that it was an agenda item because of the way our public participation reads. So.
Great.
Next would be a technology survey update from Mr. Doherty.
So before I give, is this on? Before I give the technology survey update, those of you watching at home, we missed the student showcase. We had an issue with the computer I wasn't aware of till somebody texted me.
No.
I know, I'm sorry. Everything looked, we should start over. We'll just do the whole meeting again. No, everything looked fine, and then somebody texted me to let me know that it wasn't working, so I apologize to everybody. Yeah, we started with this part. I'm here to talk about our smartphone policy, our survey data, kind of where we've been, where we're going. So in August, we did do a survey to all of our parents. I'm going to post this online later because I know folks watching at home cannot see my screen right now. But we did have 904 parents fill out the survey. We did ask them to fill it out once for each one of their children. So this is a little more than half of our students. I'm not going to go through the breakdown, but we have a pretty good mix of all 4 buildings. When we look at whether or not does your child bring a smartphone to school or not, it's split about 50-50, but if I break the data down and we look at it, again, it's mainly 7-12 where those phones come in because they're not allowed K-6. And then same thing with the watches. Less kids with watches, but there are some kids that bring watches to school. So one of the first questions, do you view these devices as having a negative impact on learning? If we look at that, almost 70% of our parents did say that yes, they felt like having these kind of devices in the classroom did lead to kind of a negative impact on their student learning. But as part of that, we asked, why might you need your student to have this device in school? Are you communicating with them? Like, what is it? And when you look, it comes out to be roughly 77% saying that they don't typically communicate with their student while they're in school. If they do, it's typically schedule changes. Something's going on, whether they're going to get picked up, whether they need to be somewhere after school, or any guesses what the other big one is?
Safety?
They forgot something. Forgot lunch, forgot my Chromebook, et cetera. So I don't have the responses posted here, but when you look at the data, the vast majority is that there's a schedule change or they forgot something. Most people indicated in the event of an emergency, they would contact the office, not their student directly. So the last question we asked was, what do you feel the best policy should be, or best, I don't know, policy, I guess, for how cell phones, smartphones, devices are used in school? So the breakdown, big majority, 43% saying they don't want them during class time. Before and after school is okay, lunch and recess is okay, not before and after school. But we also have this other category down here, which is another 23%. Those folks all agreed with that, but they actually said they didn't want them at lunch and recess. So they really like the idea of not before, not after school, in between classes is fine, but not at lunch and recess. So we're going to talk later. That's one of the things we're looking at. There was a small percentage, about 10%, said cell phones should be allowed pretty much at all times. And then, 22% saying, no, never, don't even let them on premises. So honestly, that 70, what did that come out to? 70-some%, that's what we're doing now. The students are allowed, 7-12, students are allowed to have their phones before school, after school, and at lunch/recess. K-6, no phones during school whatsoever. They can't have them before school and after school. But that's kind of what we've been doing. That's gone really well. I don't have that survey data up on this slide, but we did ask our staff how that's been going. 80% of them said that it's been very effective, with 83% saying that they believe this kind of reinforcement of the policy we've always had has been a positive impact on their students. So all in all, we feel like what we've been doing has been working really well. So let's talk about kind of some of the things that we've done since enforcing that policy. Kids are smart, right? So one of the things that we saw was the minute we basically enforced the cell phone stuff, they began to use their Chromebooks or other devices to communicate. So we saw them on social media more. We saw them trying to text more through or communicate more through their devices. So we blocked social media on Chromebooks across the district as well. It's always been blocked K-6, 7-12, it was a little more open. We blocked all of that. The other thing that we're doing based on feedback from both the surveys as well as the roundtables we held across the district, we're moving toward a YouTube scenario where in K-6, so Gurney and the intermediate school, the only videos that will be available are those videos on YouTube that we've approved at the district level. So teachers will send us their video, myself or Molly, the technology coach, will approve those videos, and that's it. So if a student hops on their Chromebook and they begin to search, the only videos that they'll be allowed to watch are those that we've already approved. Really, when we dug into a lot of that data that we heard from parents, it all came down to YouTube. And that was something, so in all honesty, that is a conversation we've been having for quite a while internally. Molly and I, along with the tech advocates, have kind of kicked this around for 6, 7, 9 months now. But finally, after hearing from parents and really digging into it, that's what we think the best move is going to be. We've already begun approving videos. It won't go into effect until December 2nd, right after we get back from Thanksgiving. But I don't see that being a problem. I think the teachers are excited. The students are not. My own 4th grader let me know that he's not excited about that. But I think it's going to make the learning environment much better for everybody. So from there, kind of where we're going, first off, you'll see some new policies on the board next month. A lot of those are state-driven. They're things that we're already doing, but with Senate Bill 29 and some of the other things coming down the pike, there are some new policies you'll see. Again, it mirrors what we're already doing. There's nothing really exciting there. Second, we're going to begin gathering feedback on personal devices, specifically at the high school. So we do allow students to bring in devices of their own. They still get issued a Chromebook. They need to keep that Chromebook because there are times for state testing, for even assessments in their classroom where they need to have it. However, some kids prefer to use a MacBook or something else. The catch is, because they are personal devices, I have less control over what happens, and some of the students are using those to text, communicate, et cetera. So that's something we're gonna look at. Again, the vast majority at the high school, I know Layla left, I think there's only 1 or 2 students at the middle school that do bring their own devices, but we are gonna talk about those and gather some feedback on that. Third, we are looking at potentially restricting YouTube 7, 8 as well. We wanna see how it goes K-6. The middle school, historically, when we look at technology and just middle school students in general, they struggle with making decisions. So I always joke that if you look at our Chromebook breakage rate, it's the highest 7, 8. We see some of the self-control issues when it comes to YouTube as well at 7, 8. So let's get K-6, lock that down, make sure we're good there, and then we'll probably expand that to 7, 8. I've spoken to Layla and a couple people at the middle school as well about that. Again, we want to look at it a little deeper. I want to make sure it works well K-6, but we're looking at that. We are going to have conversations about that lunchtime recess use. It's really interesting in the survey we did with staff about the lunchtime recess use. There are some people that think the kids need to communicate, they need to talk to each other, et cetera. But some of the feedback from the students and staff is some students use that as a way to just take a break. So hopping on their phones is their way to, it's not that they're not being communicative and they're not talking to their friends. That's their kind of downtime. So I want to look into that. I want to hear more from the students about that before we kind of go any direction with that one. And then last but not least, we're going to take a look. We've heard some concerns about Chromebooks during free use time at Gurney as well as the library. So we're going to take a look at that, dive into that a little bit more, uncover what we can see and take that from there. So a lot of stuff coming down the pipe. Really excited though. Feel like this year has gone really well when it comes to technology. I'm excited about some of these changes. Again, a lot of it is stuff we've talked about in the past, and we're just ready to move forward on now. Any questions?
Just to clarify, you are going to post the results?
Yeah, I will. I'm going to work with Aaron, and we'll get them posted on the website. I'd like to take a little bit of what I'm reading from here and get that out there as well. So there's a little more context other than just, here's the results, have fun.
That's great.
I'll put some context to it.
Great.
My question was going to be about that mixed feedback that we kind of got from the teachers last time around
Sure.
about lunch and recess and, for some kids needing to have that downtime. So I really appreciate the fact that that's kind of next steps.
Yep.
And is to talk and try to assess what that would look like for them, or even best practices statewide or comparable public schools that we have or nationwide. What are they doing for those kids who need that?
Sure, and
option?
that's part of the research that we're going to do.
Yeah.
When it comes to statewide, I know a lot of schools have moved in the similar directions to what we have, right?
Everyone's
Not during class, before school, after school. Lunch, recess is kind of a mixed bag, but that's kind of some of the research that we want to do. And I do want to talk to some schools that went this direction last year and get their feedback as well. I know Twinsburg, my home district, they did it last year, so I've talked to them a little bit, but I want to just want to do the research before we just, broadly implement something.
awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep,
Thank you.
okay.
That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you.
The last thing that I have for tonight for you is the draft, and it will be published soon and sent out to the families that attended of the intermediate school roundtable. So this is done in the same format as the Gurney one that we presented, I think, last board meeting. And just remember that the 7-12 one, we had I think we only had 7 participants. So we weren't able to conduct those the way we wanted. We think it was a poor date. So we will look at trying to reconvene that group sometime, maybe early winter, spring, to make sure that they have that opportunity to have that roundtable. So what you'll see in the intermediate school was that we had 20 parents of current students attend. 3 teachers and staff, and 6 facilitators for that day. The next part are just the prompts. They'll look very similar to Gurney, as well as the garage sale section, which defines how we looked at the different systems or procedures that we have in place. The next part is the key findings and recommendations. You can see that technology and academic growth came up, and again, talking about Chromebooks, the platforms that we use, the challenges. You see YouTube is right in there as a challenge, so they're already ahead of the game working on those projects. Number 2 for the intermediate school was the student and staff well-being. Some of the initiatives that they're looking for that consistency, how it's being applied across the building, across the classrooms, and you can look at some of the recommendations and action steps. 3 would be programs and courses. They are looking for maybe some more extracurricular options for non-athletic students, and I think that falls right in line with what Dr. Sabo was talking about, with opportunities for students to be engaged and involved. Their number 4 was family and community engagement. Again, talking about opportunities for more informal and academically focused events so that volunteers had the opportunities to participate. 5 was communication and information sharing, just frustrated with the platforms, the volume of information, how can we streamline that? And then on this one, it was just feedback we got from the Gurney Roundtable, again, grow and thrive. So they wanted to see the overall arching themes of the garage sale. So we went ahead and made a category for that so that you could see that pulled out directly. And then the conclusions are a little less in depth. Again, we only were able to, for this one, have 20 people participate, parents and 3 staff. So we kept the next steps kind of brief, because just like with Gurney, we'll convene our leadership teams, our administrators, our teachers, and we'll look at everything and see exactly what Mr. Howe and his team wants to put in place. And then as a central leadership team, will support that work. So this is just the reoccurring themes from the session that we held. And this will be going out probably, Mike, we're pretty close sometime this week.
I would think so, yeah.
To getting this finalized. It just went to Mr. Howell for review, so we should be in good shape. Great. That's all I have.
Thank you. Ashley, do we have anybody signed up for public participation?
We're actually gonna do the treasurer's report before
First?
that.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. Have that on there, right?
Yes.
We do, okay.
I just wanna make sure. Yes, so I am going to talk about the 5-year forecast. We switched the way we did this, I think last year was the first year, so that we could present all of the reports, and then if anyone has any comments or questions during public participation before the board votes on it, then, you know, there's the information's going out in time for somebody to actually speak. So I am going to talk about the 5-year forecast. This is a requirement of the state. This is something that we have to do every November, and we have to do it in May. It's a living document. I am in there making adjustments all the time, and kind of, you know, playing out scenarios and seeing how things work, how things interact. If, you know, A happens, then what happens to B? So this is something that I'm always in. What you have in front of you, I gave you a hard copy of the actual report. That's what you're going to be voting on later in the meeting. It's a 23-page report, so I didn't make copies, although I guess now I probably would have been able to with the number of people who are actually here. I'm gonna go down through this, and the actual forecast, if you're looking for the actual numbers, the last page of that 23-page report is the actual report. So those are the numbers that get filed in a standardized format with the state. They compile everything, and then they have them on ODEW's website, available for anybody to go and pull any district. So all of the report in the first 22 pages of that is supporting information. It's more analysis and that type of thing. The last page is the actual forecast. So you're gonna approve the whole report, but the actual forecast is that last page if that's what you're looking for.
And Ashley, do we post that forecast on our website?
Oh, of course.
Perfect.
Yep.
And where would people look for that?
If you go to the school district's website and you go to departments and treasurer, I will have it there starting tomorrow. I want to wait until the board has approved it. It will be out there. I think the last one is out there though. The May forecast is there right now. I will replace the May with November, and actually all of my monthly reports go out there for a period of time, so if anyone's interested. I don't know if I can track the number of hits, so maybe I'll start asking
maybe.
Mike to tell me how many people are looking if I start plugging in at the meetings. But there's all kinds of information out there, so go look at it. Okay, so a few things to keep in mind when we're talking about a 5-year forecast. The first thing is it's an estimate. These are not hard numbers when we're talking 25 and on. These are estimates based on what we know today. We've seen in the past that things can change very, very quickly in school finances, whether it be the overall environment, things happening like COVID, or just somebody gets an idea down in Columbus and with the one swipe of a pen, everything's changed. So this is based on what we know today. It makes a lot of assumptions. So in order to estimate things, I have to assume certain things are going to happen. There are lots and lots of variables that go into these numbers. So the one thing that I do know is I'm never gonna be exactly right. One thing I can tell you is it's wrong. But it's the best that we can do with the information that we have right now. Obviously, we're gonna be more accurate on FY25 because that's what we're in right now than we are on, fiscal year 29. That's 5 years out. The further out we get, the less accurate we are, obviously. So the numbers can and do change. If something significant does happen during the year, we can resubmit this at any time. I have to submit in November. I have to submit an update in May. Something really big in our district were to happen in the middle of the year that would change these numbers, I can always resubmit it. The other thing to keep in mind is when we're talking about the 5-year forecast, we're talking about the general fund. So I think our community is pretty used to seeing general fund information because that's most of what I report on every month. But this does not include the permanent improvement fund. It doesn't include the food service fund. It doesn't include the federal grant funds, all of those types of things. Obviously we have other ways that we track that, and we do, have expectations for those funds, but they're not included here in this 5-year forecast. I knew I was gonna go backwards. Okay, so this is the summary of the forecast. These are all of the subtotal lines. You can see beginning balance for each year, total revenue, total expenditure, annual surplus, or in our case, now deficit, and ending cash balance. So when I say deficit, I do not mean cash deficit, I mean spending deficit. What that means is our expenditures are exceeding our revenues. We're going to start, or we expect to start, deficit spending this year. We know that's gonna happen. That's how school finances work with the way our revenues are flat and expenditures, unfortunately, continue to rise. With flat expenditures, eventually your expenditures are going to exceed your revenues and you're gonna start deficit spending. And I'll have a picture of kind of how that has looked for us going back to, I think I took it back to 18. And it's very typical of what we expect to see. The one that I'm gonna show you tonight looks pretty much exactly how it did last November, because we know that this is what happens with school finance. I do it every time, go backwards. Okay, so the way I'm gonna do this is if you're actually looking at that report, I'm gonna start and just go down through every line. Every line is numbered, and that is so that we're all standard. Line 1.01 in our school is the same thing as it is in every other school in the state. So I'm gonna talk about revenues first, just gonna go down through all the revenues, then I'm gonna talk about expenditures, then we're gonna go back to the summary and kind of analyze it. So this is a picture of our total revenue. As you can see, it does stay pretty flat. That little bubble that I have to keep pulling up that was not really an increase in revenue, that was an increase in advances back in from the federal funds because at the end of FY '23, we advanced out a significant dollar amount to cover negative balances for the ESSER money that we had spent. I know you're all tired of hearing it. I say it every single month because I have to point it out in my reports, but if anybody's tuning in for the first time, that's why you see that little blip there on our revenue in FY '24. We do expect that revenue to stay pretty flat. That is by design, not our design, but the how school finances in Ohio have been designed, how our revenue works, is it is not designed to increase. It's designed to stay flat. I'm gonna tell you why. Oh my gosh, I did it again, backwards again. There should be you should be able to adjust that. Okay, so still talking about total revenue here. I changed this up a little bit. In the past, I've given you a pie chart that breaks out all of these line items and gives you the percentage. I think it might be a little bit more helpful to show you the local versus state versus other. So our local revenue, 79% of our revenue comes from our local sources. We know that. Contained in there is our real estate tax and our public utility tax. We don't have an income tax, but that is part of the program here, is because school districts do. 15% of our revenue comes from our state. Now, when I say that, that includes the 8.9% there that is the state share of the local taxes, and that's gonna be the homestead and rollback. So when I talk about state funding, often I'm only talking about those first two lines there in that middle box. Point to them so you can see. Oh my gosh. All right, Mike. We're not gonna be able to do this anymore. No. Okay, anyway, the state funding there says 5.6 and then the restricted aid is the 0.81. That's what I talk about when I'm talking about state funding most of the time. Because that 8.19%, it comes from the state, but it's based on taxes because it's a reimbursement from the state on those homestead and rollback reductions. You would think I was 112 years old. Okay, you can stop right there, actually. What's that? It's good. I mean, you took it from me. I can't. I was gonna go sit there. Oh. Like that's where I want to be on the slides. I can do it. Just I couldn't make the pointer work. Yeah, I'll just sit there. Okay, that's fine. Well, that's not gonna help. I was trying to do the little to point on the screen. I can click it. Sorry. We didn't coordinate our act ahead of time. Okay, so going down through every individual line, I'm gonna start with line 1.01, that's our property tax revenue. This is calculated, this is our effective rate times our valuation times our collection rate. So when I say effective rate, I went the right direction this time. This is where we're talking about, when I'm talking about House Bill 920 all the time, this is where effective rate comes from. So we don't just take our millage rate and multiply by our valuation. If that was the case, then this would look a lot different and you wouldn't see that so flat. But because of House Bill 920, those are flat because House Bill 920 reduces the millage as the valuation increases. So if you're looking at that calculation, when the valuation goes up, the effective rate goes down so that the dollar amount that we collect stays flat. And that's on all voted levies. So this is a table that I presented last November. I just updated it for 1 year. I added 1 year to it. That FY '23 down there, I'm looking at this first table on the left-hand side there, or chart, graph. So the blue is the effective rate. So that's what we're actually collecting. The gray is essentially lost millage. So that's millage that our taxpayers have voted on, but has been reduced. So the next table there, I just took our last 3 levies that have been passed and approved by our voters, just to kind of demonstrate how this works. The levy that was passed in 2012 was approved by our voters at 7.9 mils. this year, so for tax year '23, which was collection year '24, which was what we collected this year, we only collected 5.79 mils on that, even though our voters approved 7.9. The levy that was passed in 2017, voters approved 5.5. We collected 4.19, and the levy that was passed in 2020, which was our last one, which is, only 4 years ago, was approved at 3.85 and has already been reduced all the way down to 3.11, just in a matter of a few years. So you can see as time goes on, every one of those levies gets continually reduced as the valuations continue to go up. So that results in flat, essentially, relatively flat revenue. That does not apply to the inside millage. So when we're talking about the 3 mills in the inside and any new construction. So when new properties are built, that is new revenue to us. So that's why you will see some slight increases, and we do always expect that. We know that's going to happen, and we know how that works, and we project for it. But the increase in valuation doesn't necessarily mean increase in revenue for us.
Which is why when property value goes up 30%, taxes don't go up 30%.
Correct.
But they do go up some percent, roughly about 5%, I think it works out to be, depending on the house, because that's the inside millage piece. Is that
Right, so it's
correct?
inside
Okay.
millage. And it's also, it depends on how much your valuation increased in relation to the entire district's valuation. So the revenue to us may not increase, but if the two of you, say you have a house that's the same valuation, and this year you're paying the same taxes, say you make a lot of improvements and your valuation goes way up, yours doesn't change at all. Your taxes are gonna go up, your taxes are actually gonna go down, even though your valuation stayed the same, because it's based on your piece of the pie. So to us, the revenue is the same, but to the individual taxpayers, yeah, there's gonna be some fluctuation.
And then you pointed something out to me. We had a meeting, our finance discussion about this on Monday. We always have a pre-discussion with just 2 board members on the finance committee and some local members of the community who we really appreciate coming and doing this. We get a general idea of what's going on with the 5-year forecast. And you were explaining that to be cautious about the estimator, because we're in a different situation in Chagrin Falls because we also are split across a county with Geauga. So while you might put your numbers into the estimator and it looks like your taxes are gonna go down because it's based on what's happening within your like or similarly situated homeowners in Cuyahoga County, the Geauga piece weighs into that as well, and the collection cycle in Geauga, so.
Right, so I don't have any way of verifying that everything that they have going in there is correct.
Right.
Is it probably close? Yeah, probably. Is it gonna be exact? I wouldn't count on it.
And also, just to clarify, the estimators, like the website that's referenced on your property tax,
It's-
like that's what
yes.
you're talking
There's a-
about
there's a
as
link.
the
You get this piece of
estimator.
paper
Yeah.
and it's got your tax increase and you look at it and you go, it's gone up 30%. And then you go to the estimator and you put in the information that's on the sheet and it tells you basically whether you're above or below the line in your community to say whether your taxes are gonna go up or go down and roughly how much. But because we are in a situation where we are split across county lines, it's possible that that
There are
is
more
not
variables.
particularly accurate, so take it with a grain of salt.
Right. Which brings me to another point I would like to kind of remind everybody. I know a lot of people understand that, excuse me, if your valuation goes up more than the average increase, you're gonna see an increase. If your valuation is less than the average increase, you're gonna see a drop or stay the same. Where we get into more complication, I guess, for us is Cuyahoga, for example. We were having this discussion the other day, and somebody said, well, my valuation was less than the average, or my increase was less than the average increase, so I shouldn't necessarily see, that increase. The problem is, we're not talking about the average increase in Cuyahoga County. We're talking about the average increase across the entire district. So that's why when Geauga last year had their big bump in valuation, most people in Cuyahoga, even though their valuation did not go down, actually saw a decrease in their taxes, because the taxpayers who were in Geauga saw this big bump. They had a larger piece of the pie, which means they had a larger portion of the burden of the taxes. So now, as Cuyahoga is now catching up, Geauga's taxes are actually, most people in Geauga, in our district, their taxes should go down this year. And I don't have any examples of that. I haven't pulled any. I probably should do that and kind of provide, you know, like maybe I'll post some sort of explanation or kind of add to the one that's out there. There is one out there. Keep plugging my page. There is one out there that really explains House Bill 920, but maybe I'll pull some more recent examples now that Cuyahoga has had the increase. So yeah, it's based on your portion of the pie. I keep saying that just because I think that's an easy way for people to picture it. Is, you know, if one goes up, then obviously yours gets smaller. Across the whole district, not just within your county. Makes sense?
It does,
Okay.
it's helpful. It's confusing anyway, and then it's more confusing because it's split between two counties, but yes.
And it's not a conversation that we have on a monthly basis. It only, you know,
Right.
it happens each year when people get their new valuations or they get their tax bill. And that's really the only time they're looking into it or, you know, digging into it or asking the questions. So it's one of those things that, you know, if it's not out there all the time, it's easy to, it makes sense when somebody's explaining it or when you're thinking about it. And then, you know, next year at this time, you're gonna, this doesn't make sense again.
Well, and it's a small percentage, so people don't focus on it in a normal year, but in a year where it's a small percentage of a
Right.
big number, it's, you know, people are gonna notice and it's gonna be meaningful, so.
Right. And there are so many variables, and that's why I'm always qualifying this. Every time I talk about House Bill 920, you'll hear me throw in on the voted millage, on the voted millage, on the voted millage, because I don't want to say our revenues will never go up. They do slightly with those 3 mills that are inside. And then to further complicate it, right now we're only talking general fund. We also have 1.5 mills of inside millage on PI money. And then there's the debt millage. So, you know, there are a lot of complications and a lot of variables. I am always willing, though, to talk to anybody about it. So, you know, if you have questions or if anybody out there wants to look at their tax bill, make sure they understand something, call me, email me. I'm happy to go through something with you. All right. So, moving to the next line, 1.02. So this is still taxes, but this is the public utility personal property. This is a very small percentage. Oh, I also forgot to mention on the last slide, on the top left of every one of these slides, there's gonna be a little illustration for you to show what we're actually talking about. So I spent a lot of time on this one because it's a very large portion of our revenue. Moving forward, I'm not necessarily gonna spend quite so much time when we're talking about, you know, less than 4% of our revenue. However, public utility personal property is very similar in how we get our money. It's the valuation times the rate, but on this one, it's the full voted rate. So House Bill 920 does not apply here. And then that little blip there from 23 to 24 was timing. We had a delinquency that should have been collected in 23. It didn't get collected until 24. So if you lopped off that extra little piece there, it would look like a nice, steady, very small incline there. Okay. Next is unrestricted grants and aid. This is line 1.035. This is our state foundation aid. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about state money. And when I say they're only funding us $801 per student. This is what I'm talking about, is the foundation funding. You'll see over the last few years, from 20 to 24, it did actually increase. A lot of that is due to the Fair School Funding Plan, which is now implemented, and we are hoping that all of that gets phased in and continues, and the state will continue to see the value in funding that plan. But we don't expect revenues to continue to rise. You'll see that I've forecasted here pretty flat revenue on this money, which is about 5.6% of our revenue. Okay, so the next line, 1.04, is restricted grants and aid. So this is also from the state, but it's restricted for specific purposes. This is things like the catastrophic aid, which was renamed threshold cost, and then the wellness and success funds that they have given us over the last couple of years. The blip there in '24 is an increase in threshold cost or catastrophic aid. It's possible that that could continue to stay higher, but it's not something I would count on. The way that that program works is every district in the state of Ohio has a calculation and has expenditures that they can report to the state. It all gets reported based on certain categories of special education that we're providing and certain things that we can request reimbursement for on our payment. So everybody calculates their amount for the whole year, and then it gets sent down to the state. The state then says, okay, here's the amount that we have to fund this. And then they determine what percentage of everything that was asked for that they can give us. So it's typically between 20 to 35%, 40%. So it depends. We can't really, it's hard to predict because we can't necessarily predict what everybody else in the state is going to ask for. And that percentage does go up and down. So we know it's never going to be everything we ask for. But as needs have increased in our district, they've increased in other districts as well. And the costs have gone up for everybody, not just us. So we still are getting a small, in my opinion, a small percentage of what we're actually asking for. I went the wrong way again. Okay, line 1.05. So this comes from the state, but it is calculated based on our taxes. So this is the reimbursement of the homestead rollback monies. So it used to come in taxes. The state changed laws and said, okay, we will reimburse you for that. So they're still reimbursing us for those amounts that are reduced off of people's tax bills. And if you're looking at your tax bill, you'll see something that says homestead. It's the 10.5 or the 2% reduction. If you want to know if you're getting it, give me a call. We'll look at it. But that's reduced from people's tax bills, and then the state gives us that money back. Now, that only applies to, I don't remember when they phased it out, but our last levy, for example, that does not apply. We don't get reimbursed for that. So any new levies that are applied or that are passed, homestead rollback, we're not getting those reimbursements anymore. So this is not something that's going to go up. It's going to stay very flat. Okay. Line 1.06, this is other operating revenue. So this is just kind of any operating money that just doesn't fit into any of those other categories. Examples are investment earnings. That's a large portion of it. Fees, tuition, rentals, donations, anything that is operating money that just doesn't fit into one of the other categories. For us, investment earnings is a large portion of this, and you can see as rates picked up, you can see our revenue increased significantly in this line. The reason for the decline that I'm expecting in this line is as our cash balance continues to go down, because we're deficit spending now, our revenue, our interest revenue is going to continue to go down. So again, I don't know exactly what's going to happen with rates. This is what we know now, and we have to make a lot of assumptions and guesses, and this is my best guess. Okay. Other financing uses, this is our last revenue line. You can see it's a very small portion, it's only 1.6%. But this is transfers in and advances in. We have not had any transfers into the general fund as long as I've been here. We do, however, have advances back. So when we advance money out of the general fund to cover negative balances in federal grant funds, because recall that those are reimbursement grants, so we have to spend that money first, then we ask the feds, then they give us the money. So oftentimes at year end, or every year at year end, we will have some negative balances in those federal grant funds. We will advance money out of the general fund to cover those so that they're not a negative balance at year end, and there's an Ohio Revised Code requirement that we can't have negative balances. So we will advance money out, and then in the subsequent year, it comes back. That big blip there in '24 is once again that large advance out from '23, back in '24 of ESSER monies that were spent in '23. Going forward, you know, this is kind of one of those that's kind of hard to predict. We don't necessarily know if monies are going to get here in time from the reimbursements. So, you know, what I've forecasted out here is what our advance out was last year. I've just used that amount for the life of the forecast. So that's clearly not going to be exactly flat like that. It's going to go up and down, but again, this is one that's kind of hard to predict. Okay, any questions on revenue before I move to expenditure? Okay. Juggling three things here with my notes, my
I do
laptop, and
I do have one revenue question.
yes.
What, roughly, I mean, ballpark, percentage of the revenue we collect is for a dedicated purpose versus a general amount of money we can spend on what we as a district see fit to spend money?
The only money that is specifically restricted for specific purposes is that line that I was talking about from the state restricted.
Okay,
In general fund.
okay,
We also get federal grants. Those are all restricted, obviously. And we have some state grants that are restricted. We get some small grants from, I can't even think of an example, but sometimes a teacher will find something out there they want to apply for a grant for. Those are usually restricted. Some of our grants from our support organizations, because when we ask them for money to fund something, we tell them what we're going to fund it, you know, what we're going to do with it. That's restricted. But in the general fund, just that restricted line, which is 1.04, I believe, or 3.5. Okay. All right, so moving on to expenditures. So if you pull this and you look, you know, this is a picture of all of our revenue. So this is revenue, or I mean all of our expenditures. So it's expenditures plus the financing uses, which is going to be those things, and I'll get to this. This will be one of the last expenditure items I talk about, but this is talking about transfers to and these advances. So this does include advances out. So it kind of, when you have a year where you have a large advance out, it can kind of skew this. The numbers are what they are, but they're not necessarily an expenditure if you're advancing. I don't consider that an expenditure because it's coming back. So this can sometimes get a little skewed. When we're looking at this, I want to, because it looks like expenditure just continues to go up. I think we all know that in our own personal lives even. Things cost more, expenditures continue to go up. But I really want to look at this at, this tells a very small portion of the picture, it doesn't tell the whole picture. And one thing that's really important that I think is important when we're talking about this and when we're talking about increasing expenditures. This is a slide that I showed you. That's why the oranges don't even match, because I just pulled it straight from another presentation. But this is a slide from July where we were talking about our June expenditures. And it's comparing our expenditures to inflation rates over the last 6 years. So The orange there is our actual expenditures, and then the gray is what our expenditures would have been had we kept up with inflation. So I think it's really important when you're looking, if all you look at is one column chart that shows increasing expenditures, it's a little scary. But I like to show this because I like to assure taxpayers as well as the board that our team is doing a heck of a job at controlling that increase and that slope.
Yeah.
Actually, this one that I created in July was using inflation rates that I found on usinflationcalculator.com. And I averaged out each month and came to an amount to come to these, my estimates here. And it was about 4% per year. In working on my forecast, we have a software program that we use. And there's all kinds of diagnostics in it, things I can click on, and I can get lost going down rabbit holes. But one of the things I found when I was playing with it this year is they created something like this for us. And their number for inflation, which I have their source in my October reports actually, was 5.67% over the last 5 years. So their comparison looks like we're doing an even better job. So it really, I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to find inflation rates. It's not just it was 4%. There are so many categories and so many ways to break it down. But no matter how you look at it, we are beating it. Okay. Talking about expenditures and where we spend our money, 75% of our money goes to personnel. I think we know that, and I think if you pulled this exact graph or pie chart from every district in the state, you would see something similar. 75% on our people, our people is how we educate our kids. It's what we do. So that's including salaries and benefits. The darker orange there, the purchase services, is 12%. And then kind of all the other little categories, which I'll go through, is 13%. So our first line, which is obviously our largest expenditure, and you can see it's up there in the left, the top left is 55% of our expenditures, is salaries and wages. Severance is also included in this line. The scale here, it's kind of hard to really, because this does go from 0. If I had pulled the axis and made the axis a smaller percentage or a smaller window, you'd be able to see the steps a little bit better. But you'll notice from 20 to 21, it actually did go down. It looks flat there. And then 22, it kind of went up a little bit. But if you were comparing, 25 to 21, that's not a significant bump when you're talking about salaries. And that's because in 20, we pulled $1.2 million out of our budget. And you can see the evidence of that there. So again, this is one of those things where this is part of the reason that we beat inflation, is because of that reduction in our budget back in 20, that, now a lot of those things, because of inflation, the expenditures are catching up to us. But cutting that out saved us not just 1.2 million that year, it has saved us that much every year going forward.
Okay.
Moving to benefits. Included in this line is retirement. We are required to, by law, to contribute to the retirement of our employees. It includes healthcare, dental, workers' compensation, unemployment, and Medicare. The largest expenditure in here is our healthcare and our retirement. Healthcare, since we switched to self-insurance, we've been very lucky to enjoy 0 and 1% renewals. This year, so our renewal for this year, which will start in January, we are taking a 5% increase. So to us, if you're looking, from 20 to 24, the difference in how flat that is versus 25 to 29, I am projecting larger increases in the future. That's because when we switched to self-insurance, you know, we were at 0 and 1, so it stayed pretty flat. And then last year, we even enjoyed a premium holiday. Now, 5% to us, if you're looking and you're comparing, it looks like a bigger increase. But if you compare this to, I'm guessing, a lot of other schools and industries across the state, that's going to look a lot different, and those steps are going to be much higher. 5% sounds high to us because we've been seeing 0 or 1, but you know, industry standard, people are seeing 10 to 20% increases annually. So I'm still very happy with the 5%, although I would have preferred 0. It is, you know, we're looking at 5%. Going forward, what I've assumed here is a 5% increase every year. So that could change. And if that does change, that, you know, this is a significant portion of our expenditure. This could really affect the forecast, either, you know, up or down. Okay. Next line is 3.03. This is purchase services. This is about 12% of our expenditures. That's not what you're looking at. Okay. This is 3.03. Okay, 12% of our expenditures. You can see we've experienced a fairly significant increase in this line this year. I think this is where inflation is hitting us. Vendors are just passing on all of those extra costs to their customers. So a lot of our costs are up in those things. This includes utilities, so electric, gas, all of those things. Also includes special education, excess costs, legal, property and liability insurance. All of those things are contained in here. It also includes deductions that come straight out of our foundation. A lot of that is for specific types of tuition and things like that they take it and then I have to post it. So I'm expecting it to stay flat here. This is what we're projecting, but it is an increase from last year. Okay. Line 3.04 is supplies and materials, and I really want to point out on this, that little pie chart on the top left-hand side, we're talking about 2.5% of our expenditures. This is often where we get helpful suggestions on how to reduce our costs, to just stop buying stuff. These are classroom supplies. These are custodial supplies. Fuel is included in here for our buses. Textbooks, electronic media, all of that type of stuff. That's all in here, and we're only talking 2.5% of our expenditures. So while our staff does an amazing job at really controlling these costs and looking around and trying to find other vendors where they can find something for a little bit less so they can stretch their budget a little further, tightening our belt only does so much when we're talking about 2.5% of our expenditures here. And again, you do see a jump from 24 to 25, and we are not immune at this point to inflation and increased costs. Okay. Line 3.05 is capital outlay. That is equipment. So we're talking general fund. Capital outlay is equipment, furniture, vehicles that are not buses, anything that's tangible, that's going to last more than a year and is a larger dollar amount than, say, staplers and pencils and paper and that type of thing. So over the last few years, so you see a jump there. Over those last few years, we had some other sources of money sitting in some funds that we were using to cover equipment purchases. We had some ESSER money that we were using. We had some state grant money that we were using. And then we had some money built up in an 009 fund that we were using for our Chromebook purchases. You know, Mike has to make a Chromebook purchase every year, replacement, things like that. And we hit that as long as we could and stretched that out. This does not mean we're buying this much more equipment. It just means that those expenditures now have to hit our general fund because those other sources are gone. Line 4.3 is other objects. Again, just like the revenue, this is kind of the catch-all. Any operating expenditure that doesn't fit in one of those other lines goes in here. So this is things like our county auditor treasurer fees. So we have to pay the county auditors to actually collect our taxes for us. Audit costs, we're required to have audits. Bank fees, memberships, that type of thing goes in this line. So we're expecting that to stay pretty flat. So this is other financing sources. This is one, just like the revenue, on the revenue side, this is the one that's kind of hard to predict. So this is transfers out and advances out. Transfers out, when I'm talking about transfers out, it's a permanent transfer. So we transfer money out of the general fund into the permanent improvement fund. We transfer money out of the general fund into athletics, student clubs, those types of things to cover those programs, because we don't bring enough in necessarily in those programs, so the general fund subsidizes them. And once it's transferred out, it stays there. Advances out are what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the federal grants, and it's just to cover those negative balances, or it's a temporary advance out. So advances are temporary in nature. They're not meant to stay there, and they're meant to come back. So those are a little bit harder to predict. Okay, so I've gotten through every line. This is a picture of our revenue versus expenditures. The solid line is what has actually happened. Dotted line is what we're projecting. If you put this and overlaid it on November from last year, it looks very similar. I think because we've experienced some increases with inflation in some of these lines, on our expenditures, the gap is a little larger than what we were expecting last November, but it's still there. And the general picture is pretty close. So the orange there is expenditures, blue is revenue. We are going to start deficit spending, we believe, this year, so that's where those two lines cross, and then you'll see the expenditures continue to outpace revenue, and that gap there just continues to get larger and larger as our revenues stay flat. This is the exact same chart that I had at the very beginning of the presentation, just to kind of bring these numbers back around to you. As you saw on this previous slide, the gap gets larger, and you can see that here with our numbers. That fourth line down is the deficit, the spend deficit, not fund deficit. That spend deficit gets larger as the years go by, and when that happens, when there's deficit, we eat into our cash balance. So the cash balance is going from the beginning of this year, we had 21.5 million in the general fund. We're projecting around 7 million by the end of 29. And so if you look at the size of that deficit, if this went out to 30, starting with only 7, a deficit that's going to be larger than 4.8, I'll let you do the math. This slide and the last two slides all have the exact same information, just presented in a different manner because everybody's brain works different. So this one, again, blue is revenue, orange is expenditure. You can see in 25 that expenditure starts to outpace the revenue, and the green is our cash line, and that green starts going down as we are outpacing our revenue. We're spending down our cash balance, and that line is continuing to go down. So while that line is going down, I would like to continue to point out that we have done a lot to stretch this and get it further and further down the road. And the picture could look a lot worse. And, you know, our entire team is really committed to strong financial management, making smart decisions, finding efficiencies wherever we can. And we, you know, we're beyond what we promised our community, and we're pretty proud of it, and we're still in an okay position right now.
What did you promise the community in 2020?
In 2020, we promised 3, expected 4.
3. Okay, and we're there.
We're at 4.
Okay,
And I am not saying we need to go on the ballot next year, so we're at 5.
so we're beating it. Okay, awesome.
Any questions?
So there's, I know, I think everybody has one right. There's one paper or one slide that talks about the days cash on hand, which wasn't in this slide. And I was just curious, for example, it says starting in now in 2024, we have cash on hand for 220 instructional days. Is that the correct interpretation? Whereas by 2029, it says we'll be down to 60. Like, what is is there a gold standard of what we would ideally have?
I think that depends on who you talk to.
Okay,
We do not have a cash balance policy. Some districts set a policy and say, here's our rigid line, and once we hit this, this is where we ask for more money or where we make cuts. We have not taken that stance. I don't know if we ever have, but definitely not, you know, in the past 6 years. Since I've been here, I don't know that I think our team is able to adjust better, and we make smart decisions. I don't know that we need a hardline policy like that.
okay.
That's just my opinion, but again, I don't set policy, that would be the board. But, you know, 90 days, I think, is minimum that would make me feel comfortable.
Okay, that's really helpful.
But again, I know that, you know, we're blessed to, I have had, you know, a situation where we can make decisions and make change. I haven't been in a situation, you know, I'm sure there are a lot of districts that would look at me and say, 90 days, you know, we never get there. You know, so
Okay.
I think it really depends. It varies district to district, board to board, treasurer to treasurer.
Sure,
So
thank you.
I don't want to get down to 60 days.
Right.
That would make me very, very, very uncomfortable.
Of course.
but-
I thought that was a very helpful slide for, you know, for me, and I'm sure the public would.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that
find that
actual
really helpful.
report that you're looking at is attached to the agenda item where you'll vote. That's what you're gonna vote on tonight. So that's in there, it's out there for the public, and tomorrow I will get it up there on the website.
Thank you.
Mike almost had the clicker from me, and earlier he said he was gonna do it so that he could just advance it and make me talk faster.
Oh,
I got it back. But it wasn't that bad.
No, it's great,
8:38.
thank you. Okay, do we have anyone signed up for public participation?
I do not believe so. Anybody? Nope.
Nope, okay,
go that
and
way.
then we have a note on here, 5.02, about the public hearing for the calendar, just making a note that if anyone wants to comment on the calendar, you know, now, or get a hold of one of us and let us know if you have comments on the calendar. Okay, Lauren, you wanna make a motion?
Right, shoot. I'd like to make a motion to enter into executive session in accordance with Ohio Revised Code 121.22 for the sole purpose of the consideration of the following matters: to consider one or more as applicable of the checkmarked items with respect to a public employee or official, checkmark items being employment and discipline. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And we will be back and we will take action after executive session.
The agenda. We need to vote on that. Mrs. Hoy?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Dr. Sabo?
Yes.
Dr. Schlepper?
Yes.
Mrs. Bendel?
Yes.
Sorry, I was like trying to yell and then it came on. Yeah, because we will come back. We'll shouldn't take long.